Okay, today we're doing our third round of notes, and these are going to be called attributes of functions. So the first thing I want you to do is I want you to, on a sheet of paper in your journal, I want you to plot these points and make this graph so we have it to look at. And then I'd like you to write down the domain and range. Let's go ahead and use interval notation. So using this graph, let's find the domain and range, and then you can push play on the video again. So after you've written this down and we're finding the domain and range, so the furthest left that this graph goes is negative infinity. The furthest right that the graph goes is 5. The lowest value on the graph is negative 2, and it touches. And then the highest the graph goes is infinity, goes up forever. Okay, so we're going to learn 5 attributes of the graph today. And the first one we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about where the graph is positive. So the graph is positive when it is above the x-axis. And another way to put that is when this function, let's give this function name f of x, that happens when f of x is greater than 0. So above the x-axis is positive, and that's when f of x is greater than 0. So let's go ahead and color code. So I'm going to use a highlighter. You can use a colored marker. So I'm going to color code everywhere this graph is above the x-axis. So I'm color coding here and here. And then I'm just going to color code the word positive. Okay, so let's go ahead and write down those intervals where the graph is positive. And we're always giving intervals of x where these attributes happen. So this is going to be positive from negative infinity. So I'm starting by describing the blue interval there, from negative infinity to negative 2. So this first blue interval starts at negative infinity, ends at negative 2. I'm going to put a parenthesis because at negative 2, it's not positive or negative. It's 0. It's crossing the x-axis. Then we're going to put the next blue interval, and we're listing x values only, and that goes from 1 to 3. So those are the intervals where the graph is positive. Next, we're going to list where the graph is negative, and that would be below the x-axis. And that's going to happen when f of x is less than 0. So let's use a different highlighter and highlight that. So the yellow is where the graph is negative. Okay, so let's give the intervals of x where the graph is negative. So the graph starts being negative at an x value of negative 2. It stops being negative at positive 1. That first yellow interval goes from negative 2 to positive 1. The graph becomes negative again, or it crosses back below the x-axis at 3, and it goes until 5. I'm going to put a bracket on the 5. What's different about the 5 than these other numbers? Well, what's different about the 5 is the graph is definitely below the x-axis. It's not crossing the axis there. So anywhere the graph crosses, I'm going to put parentheses, but at 5, since the graph is definitely below the x-axis, I'm going to put a bracket. Okay, the next 2 attributes that we're going to talk about is where is this graph increasing? And the graph is increasing where the graph slopes up, moving from left to right. So the graph slopes up, moving from left to right. Okay, and we'll write that interval down in a second, and then we're going to indicate where the graph is decreasing, and then obviously that would be where it slopes down, moving from left to right. Okay, so let's go ahead and get a different color. So I guess I will use pink. So the graph is increasing when I'm moving from left to right, and the graph is sloping up. Now that's going to happen here. That's the only time that graph is increasing. Okay, so the interval of increasing is going to be, and I'm going to use brackets on this. So we use brackets on increasing and on decreasing. So the brackets for increasing, that would be from 0 to 2. So I'm only giving the x values where that's happening. Okay, so now let's determine where this graph is decreasing. So let's use a different color highlighter, gray. So the graph is decreasing when it's sloping down. So even though that arrow is pointing up, it doesn't matter. If I was moving along this graph from left to right, I'd be going down the ski slope. So that the graph is decreasing. The pink would be where the graph is increasing. And then moving from left to right, I'd be going down another slope over here. And so that's where the graph is decreasing again. So we're going to use brackets, and I have to squeeze this in down in the lower right-hand corner. The graph is decreasing from negative infinity to 0. Careful, I'm listing only x values. In fact, after we give the range, we're all done with these y values. So you can just scratch those y values off the graph. You don't need them once you're done with range. Okay, let's give the other interval where the graph is decreasing, and that's going to happen from bracket 2 to 5. Oh, not to 5, it doesn't decrease. I need to get rid of some of this gray here. The graph is only going to decrease up to 4. At 5, something different happens. So it decreases from 2 to 4. Okay, so let's go ahead and get that written down, and we'll learn the last little bit. Okay, so we're just going to talk about where the graph is constant, and that's where it has a 0 slope. So this graph is going to be constant where it's completely flat, and that's going to happen over here from 4 to 5. And we're going to use brackets on constant just like we did on increasing and decreasing. That's the interval from 4 to 5. Okay, a couple other things that I want to just note really quickly. The x-intercepts on the graph, those happen when f of x is equal to 0. Not greater than 0 or less than 0. We already gave those answers for positive and negative, but the x-intercepts happen when f of x is equal to 0. So let's get another color, and don't worry if your graph is too jumbled up with lots of colors. If you can't keep up with all the colors, that's okay. So these are our x-intercepts. And those are going to happen at the ordered pairs -2, 0, 1, 0, and 3, 0. And there's one y-intercept, and that's where the graph is crossing the y-axis, and that's when x equals 0. So we're going to look for that point on the graph, and I'll go ahead and highlight that in red. That's going to happen right here. So what's the ordered pair of the y-intercept? 0, -2. Let's go ahead and box those so we can see them a little bit better.